All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. Second day right after lunch. We've brightened the lights a little here so that we don't put you to sleep. I'm Brian Camoy. I've got the privilege to be the moderator for this afternoon session. A very distinguished panel, as you will hear. I'll let them introduce themselves in a minute. But, this is day 2, and we've been talking about how to bridge policy into practice. And so we're going to have a really tactical conversation about resilience in action. So I want to focus on the word action, right? We've talked a lot about what resilience means, how what you do in resilience in the built environment, whether you're an owner, an operator, a regulator, but that saves lives. It saves property. And so how we break down silos, what works, what doesn't, standards, tech, innovation, we're going to get to as much of that in an hour as we can. And I'm going to warn you now, I am a recovering college professor, so I'm likely to ask you as many questions as I ask them, because my experience is you're going to learn from each other every bit as you're going to learn from us. Last thing I'm going to make an apology about, this is my California casual. Before I joined Deloitte, I spent nearly 20 years in federal service where I showed up to work every day in a 3-piece suit. So the fact that this is my casual. So please forgive me. All right, what are we going to do in the session? We're going to talk about, shared vulnerabilities, interdependencies, talk about some real world incidents that these folks have handled and what worked, what didn't, what they wish they knew, what they would encourage you to know, and then really get into the details and then have some dialogue with you. So with that, I'll again, thank you for coming. Before we get into it, don't forget you can get continuing education credits for this session. You just have to scan the code outside the door and fill out the form. So you can get something from this session other than my bad humor. And with that, I will turn it to Saurabh Singh to introduce himself and then go right down the panel.
Good afternoon. My name is Saurabh. I am Associate Vice President at California State University, Fullerton. I'm for the capital planning and facilities management. I'm in this business or in this line for over 30 years. Been here at Cal State Fullerton for the last 10 years. Before that, I spent 20 years at Cal State LA. So I have a lot of experience in the higher education on visioning, there is planning, construction, facilities management, and be prepared for whatever you're not planning. That's what my role is. Currently at Cal State Fullerton, we are one of the largest universities around. We have 100-degree programs and the most diverse student population in the nation. We are number 4 by the U.S. News and World Report in the top public universities in there. And I manage all the operations for design, construction, facilities management, operations, sustainability, energy and resiliency, and environmental and safety. And I'm very excited here for the discussion today. Thank you.
That's a big job, Saurabh. Vanessa.
Thank you, Saurabh. So I'm Vanessa Zarnecki. I work for FM, Factory Mutual Insurance. And you guys might think, what's the insurance company doing here? They're the ones that pay the bills. But no, it's more about the prevention, right? FM was founded almost 190 years ago. And it was because somebody believed that if you improve the risk, your insurance company should charge you less, right? And that's how we still build our foundation of our company, is based on engineering, research, loss history. If you prevent a risk, you shouldn't be charged for it. So I've been with FM for about 15 years in the engineering management department, and looking forward to our discussion today. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm going to need some response. Good afternoon. All right. So I'm Michelle Turner. I am the head of global business resilience for Marriott International, and that's Marriott like chariot. A lot of people say Marriott, but it's Marriott like chariot. I have been in the global resilience, continuity, governance, risk compliance industries for about 33 or so years. I'm also the chairperson of the board of directors for Disaster Recovery Institute International. And let's see, what else? Within Marriott, I manage I call it the evolved business continuity area, operational resilience. So we still do the business impact analyses and the exercising and third-party risk management and all that great stuff. But instead of saying, hey, there's accounting, let's build a plan for accounting, we take a look at the critical business processes within accounting to say, you know what? We're not going to make it if we try to build one plan that doesn't really cover the intricacies within that particular area. And so we really drill down in that. I also manage risk mitigation that makes sure that from a contract perspective, we have the right verbiage in there for the vendors. So they have the expectations. This is what we expect you to do in the event of a business interruption. I also have product management because you got to have a place to put the plans and such. And there's also program services. So from a risk management perspective, the PMO there, I manage that particular area. So
Excellent.
That's it.
Well, thank you, Michelle. So you obviously know deep experience, academe, the insurance industry, private sector, hospitality. I'll bring a bit of both the government and private sector perspective. But let's get right at it. Let's talk about real world incidents that you all have faced, and how you address them and kind of the lessons learned. But who here has Verizon for their cell service? About half of you, perhaps. A couple of weeks ago, January 15th, who remembers that outage, right? When we talk about interdependencies, I don't know about you, I have Verizon coverage and the network went down. It was about 10 hours, disrupted an awful lot of both personal lives, but businesses, operations, security, banking, if you do your banking via mobile app, and really who doesn't now, public services like emergency alerts. When that network went down, it was down for about 10 hours, turned out to be a software issue, but it showed the cascading effects of a Lifeline infrastructure, communications going down. How did that event affect all of you? And kind of what did you learn from it going forward? So Rob, you want to start?
So for us on the campus side, it was not that much of a issue because we have our own network that is done through AT&T and Synesys. We have the fiber connection that comes in there. And within the campus, we have the Wi-Fi that's readily available for everybody to do it. So onto the university operations side, it was not much of an impact, but impact to the employees, impact to the servers that we connect outside of our operation. That we just rely upon. That hey, our things are going to be going through. We do a lot of cloud-based, servers in there. So as the day progressed, we started feeling those kind of problems in there. And it was like, we can't do anything. We have nothing under our control to do it. And overall, we were just trying to maintain the campus network. Our IT was basically looking into just keep that up and running and hoping the other things. And we had like emails almost like every 10, 15 minutes from my IT, this server is down because the Verizon directly or indirectly is part of that company's network. So now you cannot do, you cannot get this software or that app. So that's what we were. But overall, the university operations went fine that day.
We're talking about stories, right? And you mentioning that specific scenario of Verizon, right, having a power outage. So it had to be about 10 years ago that I actually went to their main hub for Verizon, where all the fiber optics comes into one area in LA. I was an engineer for FM, at the time FM Global, and I went in there, and the amount of interdependencies and one point failure that the location had made FM Global say, we're not interested in insuring you. and this, you just ignited that from there. And so we do not insure Verizon because there is a bit of an inherent hazard that comes with it. But most importantly, is like they did not have a plan how to make it better, right? So just putting it out there. And we're talking about all their stories, right, in regards to how Lifeline has impacted, right, a specific business. So another example that comes to mind that I think is fresh in mind for a lot of people here is about the freeze, right? And this deep polar vortex that come through our country and create...
This week.
Yeah, this week. Quite the nightmares, right? And one that happened in 2021 is for Texas, right? It's probably one of the most expensive natural hazards that we had that impacted a lot of people, right? Have family in Dallas that were literally freezing, right? As this was going through because they had no power, they had no natural gas. And a lot of businesses were impacted monetarily, right? Like there's a lot of industry in the chemical hazards and manufacturing that could not run their plant because the dew points were improperly calculated for the temperature that was coming through. Lines were getting froze, and they were not prepared for this temperature. I think most importantly, they did not understand the hazard that they had in place, right? So it was a big learning experience. So now it comes to, this week, last week, Texas kind of did okay, right? Knock on wood here, that doesn't happen, right? Yes. But there was a lot of investment that was done since 2021 to now, right? They estimated the investment needed was over $200 million every year that they needed to do that to winterize their natural gas and power grid, right? They've done a lot of work. It's working. I don't know. We're working on a new paper right now of what was done and what were the effects of it. So more to come. But so far, all the damage that occurred for my company, FM, was over $2 billion gross loss, right? Spending $200 million sounds like a pretty good cost-benefit ratio, right? If you can see that year after year. So anyways, a couple stories there.
Michelle, the freeze, Verizon, or any other incident that you faced in your distinguished career that was disruptive and kind of what you learned from it?
So I think about a few different topic categories. One being third-party risk management in general and having open and honest conversations. The other is really dependencies and understanding the full end-to-end life cycle and who's who in the crew, as I call it. So when we talk about third-party risk management, have we really, and we found out there were some conversations that we needed to have open and honest to say, this is truly what we expect. And when we talk about recovery time objective, and when we talk about recovery point objective, here's what we expect. And you are critical to one of our critical business services. And so have we ever had that conversation with you just to sit down and make sure that you understand what we depend on you for? And that particular one was pretty insightful to really walk down that process. And really, again, the second point, looking at the end-to-end life cycle and understanding who's involved in that process, not just externally, but even internally. Have we had the conversations? Sometimes you have this process and you think a lot of it just automatically happens, but you really don't understand that in order for one thing to occur, there are 2 or 3 other groups that have had to feed into that process. And so really making sure that we had that conversation. And one of the things I think about, we talked about it over lunch, the Tohoku disaster in Japan that started maybe it started as a tsunami, but then based on that tsunami, it ended in having nuclear waste feed into the rivers, which then there were some additional, were there earthquakes that occurred? I mean, looking at the
Fukushima was an earthquake that led to the
There you
tsunami
go.
that knocked out the power at Fukushima.
Yes. So when you look at that from a poly-crisis perspective, and they called that out this morning as well, how are we really thinking about that? Have we followed the end-to-end life cycle? And it's not just you can't think of everything. No, we need to think about this is the strategy and here are the core things that we do and what are the things that could potentially impact those core areas that we need to be thinking about. So those are some of the things I think about when you bring
Absolutely.
this up.
So dependencies, third-party risk management, understanding where your risks are, understanding single points of failure. I'll share one with you, unplanned, frankly, but Vanessa, you called this one to mind. When I say Harvey, Irma, Maria, who in the audience finds those words meaningful? What was that about? Well, the military was involved, but those were names of hurricanes, 2017. I was at FEMA at the time. I ran the mission support division of FEMA, which was all the business line. I was essentially the COO of FEMA. IT, procurement, human capital, facilities, security. As I like to say, all the things that break in a federal agency were my job. I lived to tell the tale. However, day 2 or 3 at what I would call the peak of response to those hurricanes, which hit one after another. Houston, Florida, just a mess, Puerto Rico, everywhere, right? FEMA had at the time 6,000 to 8,000 full-time employees, but our disaster cadre, that we press into service during disasters, made the agency about 20,000 strong. Deployed into the field, deployed to many states, deployed to Puerto Rico. At the height of us trying to get both people resources, commodities out the door, the entire FEMA network went down. Everything. Not a single FEMA employee could connect to the internet, could send an email, nothing. So, those of you in this kind of business, what's the immediate assumption? Your network goes down during something that's on the front page of the paper. What must it be? Cyber attack. So everybody that knew anything in both FEMA, which sits within the Department of Homeland Security, is now lighting up security operations centers, cyber, trying to figure out who attacked us, how do we undo it, right? Could not find a thing. We have people who have lost their homes. We have people who are still doing life-saving operations. And nobody at FEMA can send an email, right? This went on for probably 8 to 10 hours before, you've heard the saying, I've met the enemy and it is us, right? Every month, the Department of Homeland Security sends a list to each of its component agencies of malicious websites for those agencies to block the agency's computers from accessing. It's all the things you might think, malware, all the phishing attempts that the department becomes aware of, etc. So it's truly just a list of websites. But it requires, now surely we would do this with AI or agentic AI, but at that time, 2017, it simply required a human to upload that to FEMA servers, therefore sending out the message to every FEMA computer, even those deployed in the field down to the laptops in Puerto Rico in austere conditions, right? Once they would connect to the network, they would get that instruction, and then no FEMA employee could access that list of websites. It was done every 30 days. However, the person who was responsible for uploading that to FEMA server did not. And what the server then read, because it refreshed every 30 days, the server's instruction with a blank list was to block everything. We did it to ourselves. Single point of failure. Not a single person could access anything. When we learned this was what it was, it took about 5 seconds for somebody to upload that list of prohibited websites. When I had confirmation that that had happened and that the network was back up, because I was in the FEMA Operations Center, I could see that the network had come back up. The next thing I did was walk to the administrator's office and offer my resignation because I was responsible for the CIO's office, right? He looked at me and said, "Oh, that's cute, Brian, get back to work," right? I won't use his language, we have things to do, Brian, go back to your office. But single points of failure. So let me ask about this. So with what you've talked about, dependencies, and yeah, you might have been, okay, sir, I'm on campus, but once you started to try and interact with others, Vanessa, you saw that single point of failure didn't ensure. Michelle with kind of Fukushima and this, poly crisis. How do you convince the leadership, and I think this will be helpful for the audience, how do you convince your leadership, be it a university, be it an insurer, be it a hospitality business? I did it in the government where I would go up to Congress. Another job I had was running the grant programs at FEMA, and I always get wrapped around the head of you've spent billions of dollars, Brian. How do we know we're better prepared? And we always had to try and prove a negative, right? Can I tell you what didn't happen because of these investments? Not always. But how did you convince your leadership to make the investments to be better prepared for the next incident?
So we are a state university. We are a very large university and a very small campus. We have about 45,000 students on a peak time on the campus. We have enrolled 45,000 students. So we are a community inside a community. We are only 243 acres. So when you compare 50,000 students at UCLA or Berkeley, we are dot in front of their overall. So overall density is very high. So the risk that we have it if anything fails, power fails or data fails or anything, water flood, anything is very high. So convincing not only the university administration, university president and chancellor and everything, we have to convince the state also to any funding. We don't have unlimited funds. So basically what we have is the data. That's on our side. We can show the data. We are in the business of education. We cannot cancel the classes. Right now, if power fails at 2:00 on Thursday, we'll be canceling easily 50 or 100 classes, and those students will have the loss of it. So that's the data that we try to convince. We get kudos for showing that the continuity is going to be disrupted. You will have to do it, but it doesn't always come with the funding that we needed. So we have to be a little bit more creative to the smaller funding that we get, and that as she said that single point of failure. So then we start to look at it. If our power failed at the SE level, then we can't do anything. But if the power failed at a building level, what can we do? So we have started, or we've been doing that for a long time, that we have identified those circuits that will bring the fire alarm back, the data back, and the classes can continue faster. Labs can work, so we are not losing any research. So we are going to that micro level in there to find that out. So we have a generator that will support the fire life safety generator is required by the code. So we have that. We upsize it a little bit so we can just make sure that we can get to that side, because the funding is not there. Once we see that some funding is coming in, we try to do the generator for the whole building. We go to the next building and then try to do that on that one. But in limited funding, limited thing, we just use the data on our side to convince And whatever we get, we just try to best use of it to make sure that we are not completely shut down. We have non-essential functions that we can send the staff home to work from home that day if that's so we cannot cancel the classes.
Excellent. So data. So there's part of this story that is about what good data is going to be persuasive to your leadership. Vanessa, what else?
Yes. So for us as an insurance company talking to our clients, it's about people, right? This is about two individuals that you're talking to each other, or maybe a group of people. And it's about what's important to them, right? How do we make a connection from their needs, their motivation to what we're trying to sell? Because we're selling risk improvement, we're selling resilience, right? And it's about who is that person and identifying who is the decision maker in that room. If I ask the question to you, do you have the ability to say yes or no? And if the answer is I have to ask my supervisor or whoever it is, then you're not talking to the right person. So make sure that you tier up to the level that you need and that you get to know that person. Is it a lawyer? Is it a CFO? Is it a risk manager? Do they care about data? Do they care about emotions? How do they like their visuals shown? Do they want a 30-slide PowerPoint, or do they want to sit down at dinner with the whiskey and have a discussion, right? For us, it's about people. It's how do you connect with those individuals? How do you get to the point of their motivation to sell that to? And then from there, right, we have the data, we have the information, we have the engineering, connecting the dots between what their needs are and what we're offering, and making that real value proposition will make a real impact, regardless if you're talking to, let's say, for example, for us, we insure some power generation entities, or if it's a hospital, or if it's an educational institution, right? So we go about what are the things that they're trying to achieve, and how do we connect the dots to the resilience portion of it? Thanks.
So I'll tell you what's worked, but I'll also tell you where there are definite opportunities for improvement, okay? So the definite opportunities for improvement, I got this from Tony Scott. So Tony Scott was the CIO for Microsoft, and I had an opportunity to work with him. He actually came from Disney. And I did an article with him and asked the executive article with Disaster Recovery Journal. And he said, Michelle, one of the things that you don't want to do from an executive or a C-level perspective, don't try to put the fear in us. Don't try to say you need to do this because, hey, you don't want to be wearing an orange jumpsuit and not everybody looks good in orange, right? So you want to come at them with, here's the value add to the organization. Don't try to scare me. Tell me the value add to the organization, because they are responsible for the survivability of that entity and the employees within. So give me that value add proposition type of information. When I think about that, when I communicate to other executives or to C-levels, I'll say, this isn't just about preparation or just about recovery. This will help you in steady state as well, and it will help you to align with the strategy of the organization. If the strategy of your organization is to ensure that there is connectivity to the community that you serve. Well, if you are a technology company and you're looking at uptime and things of that nature, then you want to make sure that you are supporting the strategy of the organization and putting that work in. So it's really about steady state by better understanding what I need to do. Yes, in the event of an emergency, I might want to understand that, but I get to understand, well, wait a minute, where are the milestones and checkpoints that I need to have from a steady state production perspective? How do I need to make sure that things are ticked and tied on this level? So don't make it about fear, because that doesn't always work. And speak to how this is really tied into your strategy and your steady state.
Excellent. How you persuade your decision makers in this, really important. Learned my lesson in developing policy at the White House and the National Security Council. We had this way of kind of really reframing preparedness was during the first Obama term. We really wanted to build on what the Bush administration had done, because the Bush administration had stood up really the Homeland Security enterprise in the aftermath of 9/11, after the October 2001, after the anthrax attacks. So we wanted to move from these really detailed scenario-based plans to more kind of capabilities-based planning. So my staff and I had done all of this work. We had all of the data. We had all the binders of, examples and playbooks and PowerPoints. And we tried to persuade a senior official in the White House who was not familiar with domestic preparedness, emergency management, had come from the intelligence community, and we came in there thinking we had the virtue with us. We had the right thing. We had all of this information, and it took us 18 months to persuade the official before the document cleared the interagency process and made it to the president's desk for signature. And upon reflection, through other events, other policies, other disasters and emergencies, what we realized is that this individual needed to know why before any of that data. It was more of an emotional hook, more of a why should I care about this? In all of the things, the most limited thing at the senior levels is what? Time. In all of the things we're doing, Brian, why should I spend time on this? Why should the president spend time on this? So we didn't get to that. We didn't get through the why part of it effectively for a very long time. And ultimately, the president signed out. It hit his desk on March 18th, 7 days after Fukushima. And when, at least at that time, the office that handles the paper flow in and out of the Oval Office is called the staff secretary. Very powerful position. The person controls what the president sees, and the person can block anything from going into the Oval. So you always wanted to be nice to those folks. But after the president reviewed something, if he had questions about it, just write it on the margin of the document. You would then, the next morning, either by paper, you get an email, BFO, back from Oval. The president's question was, did we do this because of what just happened in Japan? In other words, are you proposing we redo our entire preparedness infrastructure because of what happened 7 days ago? No, I said, wow, if the president thinks we got all this done in 7 days, he thinks we're much better than we actually are, because it's taken me 18 months for the reasons I just explained to you. But he signed it out, and we kind of moved out. So, but knowing how your leadership makes decisions. Anybody learn that lesson? I'm curious. I warned you I was going to ask you questions. But anybody learn that lesson about needing to approach your leadership on these issues with a different way? Did you try and convince somebody with data who didn't want data? Did you try and convince somebody with kind of an emotional hook when all they cared about was the data? Anybody have that experience?
There's a saying,
Here, I'll give you the mic.
what is it? You buy with emotion and you sell with logic, So that's exactly what you're talking about.
And have you had to do that with leadership and making these
Learning that, you learn to start with the emotion and then back it up with logic.
Right. Well, I'll tell you though, I've also worked for people who, when I started with the emotion, they're like, I don't care about your feelings, Brian. Show me how much money this is going to save.
Yeah.
Show me the business effectiveness, the business case. You can tell me about the emotion later, but unless you can persuade me the return on investment.
So my question to you is, how do you figure out that person?
You listen. You watch them make decisions and you listen. And I'll just be honest, I assumed, because I was the subject matter expert in this area, I just assumed people were going to listen to me.
So if you had
Big mistake, huge. And this was not like, you don't start your career at the National Security Council. I had been through a lot of other jobs, right? So I had a bit of an ego that I had to check at the door.
So if you had it to do all over again, what questions would have you asked the gentleman you're speaking about?
Wasn't a gentleman.
Okay.
I wouldn't have walked in with a single paper, a single binder. I sat down, had a conversation, and started with, we have a problem. This is why it matters. We have an opportunity to solve it. We have an approach that will bring you. We'd love your ideas. Invite that person in to co-create. I would have waited on all the data, the PowerPoints, the charts. I would also have checked my assumptions that just because I knew a lot about this area, that would win the day, right? What I've learned in those situations, I'd love your feedback on this too for the panel, you need to make that person the hero of the story.
Yeah.
Okay, whether or not they want it, whether or not you perceive them as to be internally focused, I would have made her the hero of this story, and I didn't. That's what I would do differently.
A lot of this is about relationship management, relationship development, and relationship management. I was at an organization where I needed to go in and conduct a risk assessment from a technology perspective. I went in and I sat down, and I had done my homework though, because I knew that this particular executive was not a big fan of risk assessments, because in their mind, they thought all you're going to do is come in, find out what I'm doing wrong, and tell somebody, and then I'm going to get blamed, right? Yeah. So what I did some homework to understand where had there been challenges in this particular area. And it just so happened that there had been a situation where the inventory of this particular product was lost because they had a site where all of their inventory was kept. They did not have a backup site where they had additional inventory. So by the time here I come bebop and wanted to talk about risk, he already has an attitude because of something that has occurred before. But I had done some homework, and I had just completed a risk assessment in another area where there was a group that actually had additional storage and access space from an inventory perspective. And so I went and I come in the room, I have everything with me. There's the team, there's the leader. The first thing he says was, Michelle, you can direct all of your questions to me. Okay, so I see how we're gonna play this. All right, very good. So I said, okay, thank you so much. Before we get started, I actually wanted to share something because I understood that there had been a challenge in your area in terms of storage, but I was just with another group that had some additional storage, and I wanted to share that with you. There's no cross charge that's involved. There's additional storage for this amount for the product, this certain weight and all of this of the product, and I wanted to share that. If that's something that you'd be interested in, that might be great just to check in with that particular group. And he looked at me. Number one, he's looking like, okay, all right, so we're in the game now. I see how you're playing this. And he's like, okay, well, thanks very much. Now, still, throughout the conversation, I still directed all questions, all comments to him, but we're talking about impact and likelihood and level of management control and all this great risk management stuff. But as the conversation went through, I could tell that based on my doing my homework, sharing that with him in a way that didn't say, well, I heard you screwed up or anything like that, right? Just sharing it to say, oh, by the way, I have some information that might be helpful. I could see the guard coming down. A couple of weeks later, it was time for me to continue with the follow-up on the results of the risk assessment. I get an email from this leader. Michelle, hey, I have a conflict with today's meeting. Do you mind meeting with the team on your own? Oh, wow, you'll be missed. Would love to have you in the room, but not a problem. Okay, so he trusts me now to be able to have this conversation. And I, in the meantime, I had sent him information. We're talking about the data that I've received and some of the information and things of that nature. But you build that trust. That particular leader, number one, we had a great conversation with the team, but that particular leader became one of my biggest sponsors, not supporters, because a supporter will say, oh, Michelle does a good job, she's cool. A sponsor will say, you know what, I don't know if you've ever been in a room to have a risk conversation with Michelle, but the way that she walks through that process, the way that she's done the homework, he really was a true sponsor and shared my name in rooms that I never even knew were there. So that relationship management is nothing to squawk at, and doing that homework and understanding what they're looking for, as you mentioned earlier, Vanessa. What's their desire? What's their passion? What do they have a passion around?
I have 3 simple tactics that we use. One is called challenge, action, value, right? Start with what's the problem, right? What can you add to it, right? And what is the value proposition, and they're connected to any question you have. For somebody bringing an objection to you, I call it the 4 C's. Connect, clarify, communicate, and confirm. Sorry, is my thing. And those 4 C's, right, really help you bring that empathetic side of the connection, right? The clarify. Sometimes we jump into solution mode right away, and we don't even understand what the issue is. So make sure that clarify, it's extremely important, right? You're probably the best at what you do on your job, right? We need to be able to connect to what is it that they need, right? And then the other thing is when we're in communication, right, you might get hit on the spot with a question, right? How could I answer this? There is the what technique, right? The first one is what are they telling me? What is it, right? That's so what, kind of the why, right? Addressing the why, and then the now what, right? What is it that I can do and move forward with it, with that problem that you brought in? So those are the 3 top techniques for like a consultative approach that we take at FM to address our clients' concerns. Thanks.
I do want to get to audience questions because, believe it or not, we're coming up soon on the end of the hour. Before I do that, kind of maybe a bit of a lightning round, because we've talked about interdependencies, single points of failure, how to persuade your leadership. Largely, these are internal conversations. Let me go external for a minute. Sarah, you mentioned, you've got your internal campus operations, and obviously Vanessa, as an insurer, you've got, policyholders, your clients, your key partners, and Michelle, certainly with Marriott, you have a lot of external partners. What's different about how you talk with or persuade them on these interdependencies? How do you work with them? What have you found works? What have you found doesn't? What's important? What's not?
So, as I said, that we are a community into a community. We are completely dependent on a lot of outside agencies: City of Fullerton, Fullerton Fire, Fullerton Police, SCE, water company, gas company, because any of that could disrupt the campus operation at any time. So the one thing that we've been successfully doing it is making that relationship that she just said, that, creating that relationship, making that relationship, and continuing them. We are transparent, showing us our operation, regular operation, emergency operation, and where we are identifying where we need their help, where we need them to be a partner with us, so we can, continue the operation for us safely. That's what we pursue them. That our intent is making sure the campus stays safe, even though we have a disruption from you that's out of your control. But we want to make sure that we are staying safe. We have the big risk because of the total number of our population on the campus at any time. We want to make sure that we don't want to put a finger at that time when that time comes. Hey, the Fullerton Police couldn't even come, so how could we run our operation? So we want to make sure that we understand each and everybody's operation, and that has become really good partner with all of those agencies that we are working with. We get, if SE is because of the heavy winds on a certain day, wants to shut the power around the campus or on campus, we get that notification not only like a journal on their website or in the news item, we get that notification going to few people on campus on one-on-one basis that your campus is in the shutdown and here's the priority. You can check the priority, and if winds go this or that, we're going to be considering that. And before that thing is, they pull the plug, half an hour, 45 minutes before we get that call, next 45 minutes. So that gives us the opportunity and everything that to, manage our operation. So that is what we are trying to do. We are just creating that relationship, continuing that relationship, and maintaining them for the benefit of each other.
I think we touched on a few things already, right? My job is really to convince people outside of my organization to improve the risk, right? And they might ask, well, this is why we buy insurance, right? But it becomes a little bit more an understanding, right? The hidden sections of a potential loss, right? So let's say you have a fire or whatever that is, right? The insurance company will cover for your fire, but what's underneath that? What are the implications that come with a loss, right? There's potentially people get hurt, right? There's potential for a reputation. There's potential for loss of revenue. Stock value might come down, right? And selling that value, because we like it or not, right? At the end of the day, it does end up being about money, right? It's always going to be part of the conversation, and it's always going to be raised up. So how can we sell risk improvement, resiliency in a way that also has a monetary value associated with it? So from our perspective, the better the risk, the lower your rate, right? And how it continues to promote membership credits for our clients, where we give money back when we have good years. Which it's a great sell point here. But at the end of the day, right, it's about protecting their business, protecting what matters the most to them. And we see opportunity in what others might see risk, and reframing risk as an area where we can get better. Thanks.
From a private and public partnership perspective, show the partnership and the collaboration. Just don't say that there's been partnership and collaboration. And so inviting the fire department or the police on campus, whether it was Microsoft, Amazon, Marriott, those areas, we've always had a strong connection with our first responders, with the authorities, just bringing them on campus for community days. So life safety is priority, and it's not just life safety of the employees, it's life safety of the community as well, and many of our employees may live in the community. And so how are we showing them that it's not just lip service, that, yeah, we have a great relationship, but we're bringing them on campus, and we've got the police car, and we've got the dogs there, and we're showing the community that these are the things that we've partnered on and things of that nature. So I know we're for time, I just wanted to give that quick snippet.
Michelle, show, don't tell. That is a great lesson in a variety of contexts, certainly in this one. We got 10 minutes left. Glad to have your questions that the panel can address. Talked about kind of dependencies, how you build relationships, and it comes down to trust, how you persuade your leadership by either data or kind of that compelling why. Showing, don't tell. What experience have you had that lead you to questions for this panel? Yes.
On the dependencies and interdependencies side, how do you manage risk for systems that you depend on that you don't have control over?
So are you coming from, well, it's both. It could be an internal group that is responsible for that particular system, but it's not your system, but you depend on it in order to move forward. What I find is that actually bringing those teams together to do that gap analysis, to say, look, this is a critical service for me, and I'm actually dependent on you for this. How does that frame in your world? Is that something that you find to be critical? Did you even know that you connected to this particular area within the organization that leads to this significant service that would have this impact? So it's really having those conversations, and when you see a gap, having some honest discussions about that. Is there a manual workaround that you can employ that would support that? If there's not a manual workaround, is there an opportunity to actually bring the leaders together to say, hey, here's a significant gap that we need to figure out? And externally, I would say, have you had the conversation, but is there a contract in place where you've actually gone through and documented what the resiliency requirements are and those expectations so that they are very well aware that we said that you support a critical business service with this particular area. And if this goes down, we have to have it back up and running within, 15 minutes to be able to support. So has that been documented and included? So those are a couple of the things that I immediately think of.
Yeah, for us is what is your risk appetite? What are you willing to take? We're all going to have interdependencies. It could be from electrical, it could be from other utilities, as well as, if we're talking about a manufacturing facility, right, suppliers and things like that, right? So what's your risk appetite? And then first identifying, right, what are those interdependencies? We sometimes find out we had an interdependency after fact, right? And so it's extremely important to assess your risk before so you have them, right? And if you have them, say, is this a risk that I'm willing to take, or do I want to implement a business continuity plan to make sure that if something does happen, I have another option, right? And sometimes when we see, especially with natural disasters, is that our business continuity plan is on the fly. Like, we're going out there and we're trying to make the best that we can. And our brains don't really work well in stress. So our best recommendation is that you want to plan ahead and have a very, detail in place, business continuity plan, emergency response plan for each of the scenarios that might apply to you, and see where are you willing to take the risk, where you're not, and what is it worth it, right? So it starts with identification, assessment, and your risk appetite.
I approach those conversations with some humility, and this is what I mean. When I was running the grants organization at FEMA, there was an IT component to approving those grants to go out the door. It's about $2.5 billion a year, right? So this was not a small sum of money. Was not getting the responsive service I believed our organization deserved from our IT. Later, I ended up owning that problem, but that's a separate story, right? When I ran the mission support division. But I called the CEO or the CIO in and kind of outlined why we were important, why these grants mattered, how visible it was. Well, this was not his first rodeo. He came to that discussion armed with all the ways my team put demands on his staff and the systems. And he basically said to me, you can't tell me that these 12 things are all of the same importance. And honestly, Brian, you're moving money. It's important. But you can't tell me that all of that is as important as the systems we rely on to deploy and track our responders and deliver that kind of assistance on the other side of the house. So, Brian, if you want faster service, you either need to make more of an investment and essentially pay for more of my staff, or you need to prioritize what functions you really want us to focus on first, because we can't do it all at once. And if everything is a priority, nothing's a priority. So what I learned from that was, one, I needed to check my assumptions. I assumed that what I was doing was the most important thing in the agency. Don't we all do that? Like when you call somebody else, isn't it really that if they would just do what I need, like right now, everybody would be better off? So I needed to check my assumptions, but I also needed to revisit my processes, my internal processes. Because frankly, there were things that my team was demanding of the systems and his staff we really didn't need to do. So I would say, learn what is going on for those system owners, learn what they can and cannot do, learn how I could contribute to reducing the demand and prioritizing so that I got what we really needed. Other questions? Yes?
This is primarily for person from FM, Vanessa and Michelle. So when we're talking about convincing the decision makers, like generally what we face in our risk management world is like two tiers, right? One is like decision maker who writes the check. They may never be kind of the beneficiary of that particular product or service, right? You're doing it for the whole organization, not really don't know the details. And then the actual user is going to get that policy or some training that they really have to be convinced. Otherwise, they're going to push back and say, hey, what are you giving me, shoving down my throat that I can't even use? So how do you kind of find the balance between this? The reason I ask is in software, when we're trying to sell software for insurance or risk management, it's always the case. The guy who needs to be convinced is more emotional, like, oh, I like this technology, I like AI. And then when you try to do a proof of concept test, the guys who come in, they're not going to write the check, but they're going to say, no, this doesn't work for us. So how do you, what's that strategy?
Yeah, excellent question. So we deal a lot with that, right? That usually the CFO is in charge of making the check and making the ultimate decision, but they base the decision on the people they trust. And that's usually the people that we get to talk to, kind of the user buyer, right? So it comes into a tier, right? You have to convince that person, right, that is going to talk to their CFO, right? At the same time, also, you got to get to tier up eventually. Have that, the 10-minute elevator speech to the person that's writing the check while you get into the details and the nitty-gritty with let's say for us, will be the corporate risk manager, right? So you have to be able to sell the value to those two specific individuals at one point. For us, you have to be able to tier up and also get the direct buy-in from the people that you deal with on a regular basis.
We got 1 minute left.
And I'll answer similar to the way I answered a previous question. Number one, what you don't want to do is say, we need to do this because the C-level says so. That automatically is going to get you kiboshed right off the top. Nobody's going to want to do anything. They're not the boss of me, even though they might be the boss of you. But right, you don't want to get that pushed down. And so when I was with an organization, actually, and I can say this because we've talked about it publicly, when I was with Microsoft, I developed the operational enterprise risk management structure for the organization. I got an edict or a directive from the board of directors. However, I already knew that there were some great things going on within the organization, but there was an opportunity to really tie those things together and drive it from more of an enterprise perspective. So the very first thing I did was acknowledge the work that had already been done from a risk management perspective. And my comment to my statements to them was, I don't want to undo all of the stuff that we've done. I want to leverage what's already here and continue to build something for the enterprise. So what you've done is actually going to help support what the rest of the whole Microsoft organization will do from a global perspective. So I think it's acknowledge what's already been done, listen, have the conversations, and make sure that you are able to show what the value will be, not only from an overarching perspective, but very specifically for that group. Here's the win, but I need to talk to you first to understand what's your feedback. I can tell you what I think the win is, but you're going to know your business better than anybody else. So let's have a conversation so we can develop that win together and ultimately develop a strategy for the organization as a whole.
Well, you all have asked excellent questions. I want to thank you for coming and engaging. We're out of time. I want to leave you time to go on to your next, but please join me in thanking Michelle, Vanessa, and Sarah.